Graham was seen as one of the closest allies of Israel in the entire United States government. You see the warm relations just in the video we were just showing you of his interactions with Benjamin Netanyahu and Isaac Herzog and others over the years as well. Since it is the top of the hour, I think we should take a moment to reflect for people who may just be joining us in the United States and around the world to reflect on Lindsey Graham's life. This is somebody who grew up in South Carolina while he was at college. His parents both died very quickly. He ended up taking essentially custody of his young sister, helped to raise her, and then moved into military service, where he worked as a lawyer for the military, has been a lifelong champion of the military, became an elected official himself, was in Congress as a member of the House of Representatives for many years, then became a member of the United States Senate in 2003 and has been there ever since. The early days in his time in the Senate, he was known for his close relationship with John McCain, the senator from Arizona, and Joe Lieberman, who was a senator from Connecticut. They called themselves the Three Amigos. They were known for being mavericks and sort of standing up to the Republican Party, also known for being very big champions of military intervention. John McCain used to joke about bomb Iran, something that they all had talked about, this idea of potential military intervention in Iran, something that never happened, and they never found a president who was willing to do that. Lindsey Graham himself ran for president in 2016, and that wide open primary when nobody expected that Donald Trump would become the eventual nominee. Lindsey Graham spent much of that campaign slamming Donald Trump, warning the country about what would happen if Donald Trump became president. But then after he did become president, Lindsey Graham became one of Donald Trump's greatest champions in the United States Senate, has called him the greatest president of all time. Just this week, described him as the GOAT of all presidents. And he worked closely with him, especially on foreign policy. Graham was endorsed by Trump just this year as he ran for Senate. He won the Republican nomination in South Carolina just this year, is in the middle of yet another campaign, and has been advocating along with Israel for military intervention in Iran. And we've seen right now, in real time, even today, United States strikes just a few hours ago in Iran. Lindsey Graham certainly brought President Trump closer to that reality. Would he have gotten there on his own? I don't know. But Lindsey Graham is somebody who is been an extraordinarily influential member of the United States Senate. And I think it's hard to underestimate how shocking and sort of out of nowhere this story came tonight, as the entire political world has been focused on Mitch McConnell's health and sort of how is he doing. Nobody would have expected that Lindsey Graham would pass away. And so we're still trying to get details in terms of what that sudden illness is. How did that happen so quickly? Hopefully we get some of those details in the hours ahead. As you mentioned, Will, and I'm sure there's a lot of people that are being woken up right now. There are plenty more that are asleep that are going to wake up and look at their phones or turn on the TV and just be completely shocked. I mean, for me, I don't know about you, Will, I thought that this maybe was a hoax. That maybe his account got hacked. And until we got confirmation from his communication teams and from others to say, no, this is in fact real, it was something that just was nowhere near anybody's bingo card tonight.
Yeah, Alex, it was a very slow news day, and when I heard this in my ear, at first I thought they meant to say Mitch McConnell. It took me a moment, and I said, "Are you sure you're talking about Lindsey Graham and not Mitch McConnell?" Because we've seen the footage of the ambulances outside of Mitch McConnell's house. There's been so much discussion about Mitch McConnell's health. There have been questions posed to Mitch McConnell's office for updates on his health. They hadn't gotten a response. So people have been suspecting that there might be some news from Washington about Mitch McConnell, but Lindsey Graham, he's been giving public statements. He's appeared healthy in public. He just met with Ukrainian President Vladimir Zelensky. He's been active. He's been traveling. He just got back to Washington within the last day or so, and so obviously we wait to learn more information about what his office is describing as this brief and sudden illness. When you say brief, you're talking about very brief. From somebody who's working and active.
Yeah, we can't speculate on what. That sounds like a heart attack, right? I mean, that's the kind of thing that would be, or an aneurysm, or something that. It was real brief. It's because yesterday, his office put out a ton of different statements on a bunch of different issues, with his name. So if he was hiding that, I don't know, but it seems like something like that is the most likely outcome at this point, based off of everything we know. But we'll learn more in the hours ahead in terms of what exactly happened to him and sort of where South Carolina goes from here, and where the United States Senate goes from here. He's also a bit of a reminder of another era in the United States Senate. Just 71, which, by the way, in the Senate is like middle age, based off of the way that some people are.
And he just
Chuck
turned
Grassley
71.
is in his 90s.
He just turned 71.
Yeah, so that isn't that old for the United States Senate, but Lindsey Graham's been around for a long time. He got into that body, pretty young. And so he has real connections to a lot of these senators from a different era that are no longer there, some of whom have died. Even Joe Biden is somebody who Lindsey Graham used to be good friends with when they both were in the United States Senate. And that relationship has been interesting and complicated over the years. But that era of the Senate, which doesn't really exist anymore, which was much more focused on bipartisanship and working together and communication between the two sides, that is the era of the Senate that Lindsey Graham first came into. And that era is slowly slipping away, as a lot of the people who came from that. I remember covering the Senate in college. I was assigned to cover the Senate for a summer and spent time talking to Lindsey Graham then, and that the Senate then was Lindsey Graham and people like Ted Kennedy, and Barack Obama was there, and Hillary Clinton, and Hillary Clinton and Lindsey Graham used to be good friends too. And that relationship soured over the years. But he was somebody who was known, especially during that era, for oftentimes going against his party, being willing to partner with the other side, especially on foreign policy issues. I think where he was especially happy, Lindsey Graham, was on what's called CODELs, which is short for congressional delegations that travel overseas, where some of the partisanship kind of goes away. These members oftentimes go into war zones together. Certainly Lindsey Graham made lots of trips to Iraq and Afghanistan over the years, as he was one of the biggest champions of that war as well. Both of those wars, I should say. And that is an opportunity where members get to spend a lot of time together, sometimes in tense situations, and develop close relationships with one another. And I think Lindsey Graham had, at different points, very close relationships with folks who were kind of iconic senators from multiple different generations, as he really spans, think about it, Will, lots of different presidents and lots of different eras in American history. From, you think of him involved when he was in Congress talking about Bill Clinton and impeachment, and working with George W. Bush on, the Iraq War and the Afghanistan War and 9/11, and, supporting John McCain against Barack Obama, and then talking with Barack Obama, and then running against Trump, and then working with Trump, and then being friends with Biden, and then fighting with Biden. Lindsey Graham has had real relationships with all of the last, American presidents for the last 30 years.
He really had to learn from a very young age how to adapt to quick changing circumstances. His parents died when he was an undergraduate. They're just 15 months apart
Yeah.
from each other, and then he had to help raise his 13-year-old sister. And so I would imagine when something like that happens and you're so young, you have to learn very quickly how to maneuver, and very few people in Washington did it better than Senator Lindsey Graham. Elex, thank you for sharing your expertise, your depth of knowledge. I imagine you're going to be rushing into the studios shortly, so I'll leave it here for now. But I know we'll be back with you from your fantastic. It looks like a home studio with a very impressive bookshelf behind you, and I would just appreciate all of the knowledge and carrying our coverage here for the last 45 minutes. Elex Michaelson will be back on the air shortly.